Thank you.
Yeah, welcome everybody. So good to see all of you here. As you enter, if you would like to change your Zoom name to include your title and your organization, this is a chance for everybody to kind of get to know each other within the ecosystem of the U.S. composting system and compostables industry. And so as you enter, if you want to change your name, that would be great. We're going to get started in just a moment. My name is Candy Castellanos, and I'm joined by Ariel Sullivan, and we are the project facilitators for this initiative. And today you are joining us in our 13th Discovery Workshop in our series, and we are featuring the voices and perspectives of municipalities and government agencies. So glad that you're here. I'm going to share my screen so that we can get this show started. So really appreciate you being here and joining us. All right. So this session is session number 13 as part of a discovery series for the initiative Improving the Circularity of Compostables and Compost. And this project is a whole system strategic planning initiative. With any good strategic planning, you begin with discovery. And so we are moving towards our 14th and final discovery workshop. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks. And so today we will be hearing from the voices of lots of different roles and perspectives within kind of the municipal and government agency world. And so wanted to share our project antitrust statement and just start with that this Future Search initiative involves stakeholders from various industries. Some stakeholders may be considered competitors in the marketplace. The Future Search process shall not be used to obtain individual company advantage, nor used in pursuit of any anti-competitive objective. To do so may violate state and federal antitrust laws. By participating in Future Search events in this process, you agree to abide by the restrictions set out in this statement. And so here we are all together again, everybody improving the whole system. And so this project is really held at the foundation of imagining a future where there is cohesive and seamless collaboration across all organizations that are part of the U.S. composting system. And so this project is a 2-year initiative. It's a whole system strategic planning and systems change effort. And we're focused on engaging pioneers like yourselves from all parts of the system to come together and create a shared vision and a collective roadmap toward optimizing the circular economy of the U.S. composting industry. So this work centers, but is not limited to food contact compostables. And we will be using the Future Search model to guide our strategic planning work taking place next month at the end of the month, September 23rd through 26th in Denver, Colorado. So this project has an incredible cross-sector array of steering committee members. We have been working together to identify kind of the scope and the emphasis and purpose of the project. Just very grateful for all of the different leaders in this space that have been holding this space with us. Alongside this project is follows a collective leadership model and a collective funding model. And so wanted to just share appreciation for all of the organizations that have joined us in supporting this project, helping us get launched and helping support us along the way. There's always an opportunity to be part of that as well. And so if you're interested, let us know. And so here we are. So we are talking about circularity, and what we mean by that is for the U.S. composting system, that the intentions of compostability are realized for compostable packaging and organic materials, and that the end product produced are able to be put back into meaningful use. And so this project has a number of different intentions. Big picture to design an inclusive whole system circularity model for the health of the composting industry that maximizes and focuses on environmental benefits, improving collaboration and coordination and information flow across the whole system, directing more food waste to commercial composting facilities, and creating value and confidence for all stakeholders, and ultimately shifting stakeholder behavior to mitigate contamination and the cost of contamination. And so this project is like an hourglass. We begin with everybody through this discovery process. We narrow down to a microcosm of the system for a 3-day intensive strategic planning event. And then we come back out to the whole community with a facilitated strategic plan activation.
Yes, and here we are at number 13 of our 14 discovery workshops. We started with 12, and as we went through the process, we learned more and we added a few. And yeah, we have quite a inventory repository of data to be used in the strategic planning process. And that is actually available on a public folder. I will make sure that that link gets into the chat, and you can see if you've missed any of these, you can check them out on the YouTube channel. You can watch the recordings, and you can also go into the public folder and just read at a high level what are some of the themes that we're hearing. And you'll probably see as you get into the data that there are some themes that are kind of rising to the surface that are common across all these different stakeholder groups. So we'll be using this data in the strategic planning process as we talk about the current state and we begin to orient and align around the future state together. And our just a little note about our last panel is going to be on the 12th, and it's going to feature policymakers and policy influencers. And this is actually going to be held at the same time as the BPI Summit during the same week. And their summit actually concludes right around 4 on the 12th. And so folks that are there in person are invited to join and stream this session. And we'll be saving about 30 minutes at the end for some live Q&A from both the audience in person and also folks online. So that will be a really good one not to miss. And we'll probably share more information regarding the event itself, since that will be kind of the next big touch point. I put a couple of links in the chat. If you are interested in coming to the event, we have about 130 folks that have confirmed, and we have an interest form. So if it's something you've been following along with these and you're super excited to be a part of the co-creation process, please express interest. If you are not able to come, we will be following up post-event and kind of widening that net again to ensure that as many folks that want to be involved in the activation and these different work streams that come out are able to do so. And without further ado, I will introduce our municipality and government agency panelists. So we have a really well-rounded bunch. We have Lisa Knapp, materials management, environmental analyst, compost program lead, public works, city of Boise, Sarah Mason, resource recovery manager with the city of Ann Arbor, Jennifer McDonald, assistant commissioner, solid waste management with the New York City Department of Sanitation, Darla Arians, producer responsibility program lead, Colorado Hazardous Materials and Waste Management Division, who will be reading their answers by proxy. Shannon McDonald, Natural Resource Planner with the Maryland Department of the Environment. Ilana Goldstein, Sustainable Materials Management with the US EPA Mid-Atlantic region. So welcome everyone. It's so nice to have your voices here. We'll follow the same process as we usually do. So we're going to start with question 1. Which is tell us about how your municipality or agency interacts with the U.S. composting system. What role does it play in the composting system and or compostables industry? And we will start to hear from Lisa Knapp first with the city of Boise. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I am the compost program lead here in Boise. Boise is a city of about 240,000 residents. We are the capital city here in Idaho, and we sit in a growing metro area that's quickly approaching 1 million people. Our municipal solid waste programs here provide trash and recycling collection to residential and commercial customers through a franchise hauling agreement with Republic Services. For organics, Boise has had a residential curbside program since 2017. The program is currently available to our single family household residents, which includes about 79,000 homes. One unique success here in Boise is that when we launched our program, we launched it as an opt-out program, and our rates are structured so that residents who choose to not participate in composting and recycling or diversion programs have a higher monthly trash rate than those that do. Our franchise hauler provides weekly year-round collection of yard waste and vegetative food scraps, though we are currently just waiting approval from our DEQ to be able to accept all residential food waste, including meat and dairy. We do not currently accept any compostable products or packaging in our program, with the exception of craft paper leaf bags. In addition to our single family residents here in Boise, we have around 21,000 multifamily households. These are families who live in apartments and condos and other houses that are classified as commercial and therefore don't have access to our curbside compost program. Just this month, we launched a food scrap collection pilot where multifamily residents can register and bring their food scraps for composting. And we plan to run this program for about 12 months and evaluate if we're going to continue it from there. On the processing end, we own our own windrow composting facility, and we have a contracted operator. The facility processes around 35,000 tons of organic waste each year. A somewhat unique aspect of our operation is that we as a city retain ownership of the material itself throughout the process. We're responsible for the end use of all the compost produced, which gives us a vested interest in the quality of the product. We are also a participant in the USCC's SDA certification program. And then on the end use, we've developed a very successful customer and community give back program. Our goal is to return all of those nutrients and organic matter back to our valley soils. We have 2 self-serve give back locations in the city where residents can pick up compost. And we also have a program in place that can deliver 20 yards of compost to select locations at no cost. Last year, our facility sent about 40% of our outbound material directly to Boise's neighborhoods, schools, and community gardens and parks. And the remaining material is wholesaled in bulk quantities. So that's a little bit about our program, and yeah.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Sarah, let's go to you.
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I've been following along with this process, and I think it's a very interesting conversation, and we're glad to be a participant. I am Sarah Mason. I'm the Resource Recovery Manager with the City of Ann Arbor, so I manage our trash, recycle, and compost programs. The city collects all solid waste within city limits from single-family, multifamily, and commercial customers through a combination of city trucks and crews as well as contracted collections. Oh, I did want to mention Ann Arbor is located in Southeast Michigan along the beautiful Huron River, which is behind me. We have a population of about 120,000, and our residential mix is about half in single family and half in multifamily. For our compost program, we do provide curbside collection to single family homes of both yard waste as well as plate scrapings. We have a cart-based program, and we also do leaves in craft paper bags. We accept, we have a limit of 10 bags for part of the year, and then we increase that to 20 during our heavy leaf season in the fall, which is generally from about October to December. Our food scrap program goes to once a month for the winter months of January, February, and March. We don't really need to do yard waste collection during that time. Historically, our compost program was seasonal of April through December. And then in 2022, we added those winter month collections to get at food scrap. In that program, as far as compostable products, we accept things that are have a CMA certification and that are made of fiber. So we don't accept any compostable plastic products of any kind. We at this time do not have a program for our multifamily residents. We're piloting at a few properties, collection and carts. We're also looking to establish a drop-off program. That's something we're researching and hoping to do in the future to be able to better serve our multifamily residents for food scrap collection. And we also own a compost site, but we contract out the operations. In contrast to Boise, our compost operator is responsible for the sale of the product. We do receive 1,000 cubic yards annually that residents can pick up for no charge. yeah, so looking forward to being here.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, Sarah. And Jennifer McDonald, let's go to you.
Hey, hopefully y'all can hear me through this. My network's been a little finicky today. I should open by saying I accepted this invitation with the caveat that I'm really going to speak using my almost 20 years of experience in the industry, not necessarily reflecting the official views of the city of New York. But I have been working in organics recovery for quite some time. I can share that from the city's perspective, we own and contract operate, similar to other presenters, have a contract operator of the largest compost facility in New York City. We're doing about 40,000 tons a year through that facility, primarily leaf and yard, but increasingly some food scraps. We are soon to be home to, I believe, the largest residential collection program in the nation. As of October 6th, we will be collecting in every borough of New York City. Right now, we do residential collection in Brooklyn and Queens. We'll be rolling it out citywide in October. I think we're at about 8.5 million people.
Jennifer, we lost your sound. The last thing I heard was 8.5 million people, which is incredible. The scale is pretty remarkable. Let's see. And we can circle back around to
Yeah, we still can't hear you. So let's just, well,
oh, there you go.
yeah, we can't hear
See,
you.
I can't use my phone. They prohibit Zoom. Okay, let me see if I can reconnect.
You're coming through. You actually just started coming through. So maybe if you try one more time.
Yeah, I'm sorry about this. They're very protective, so I can't use my phone either. Zoom is prohibited on our devices. In any event, we have 8.5 million people here, and we are going to have the largest residential program as of October. We see our role as a service provider, primarily collecting material. We have about 6,000 sanitation workers and our white trucks. We utilize brown bins for food scraps and yard waste on the residential side. And we do accept material in the paper bags and even some clear plastic bags for leaves. We also are a resource for outreach and education. We've done a lot over the years with educational materials and programming. There's an organization called the Sanitation Foundation that provides targeted training, and they have a great online resource as far as where material goes. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great. Wonderful to have you. Thank you. All right. So I am going to speak to Darla Arians by proxy answers, who's the producer responsibility programming for Colorado Hazardous Materials and Waste Management. So Darla says CDPHE provides regulatory oversight for solid waste composting activities in Colorado. This includes registering and permitting composting facilities, compliance inspections, compliance assistance, and data collection. In addition to this, CDPHE has developed 2 independent reports on the state of organic waste management in Colorado. These reports detail the current state of affairs for organic waste generation, collection, and management in Colorado, while providing recommendations on how to increase the prevention and diversion of organic waste in the future. With EPR for packaging and paper products in Colorado, compostable packaging is included as a covered material. This means that the producers of compostable packaging are required to join the Producer Responsibility Organization, PRO, Circular Action Alliance, participate and pay dues into the organization. As a result, compost facilities that readily accept compostable packaging materials are eligible for funding or other assistance to reduce the cost of managing or increase the effectiveness of efforts to manage contamination and to process and recover compostable packaging materials. So that is Darla, and now we're going to go to Shannon McDonald.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm here as a regulator representing the Maryland Department of the Environment. I have a unique opportunity in that I support our state's food residual diversion law, but I also have a non-regulatory oversight of our recycling market development, which includes markets such as compost. The Maryland Department of Environment regulates both the process and the operations of our compost facilities and natural wood waste facilities. So that includes any applicable permits associated with process and operations and inclusion into any political jurisdiction's solid waste master plan. Maryland's sister state agency, the Department of Agriculture, is the one that regulates the operator and the physical product that's generated heading for donation or market from compost facilities. Maryland does have a food residual diversion law and supporting regulation where that we as a state agency provide outreach, education, compliance, and enforcement of the law associated with food residual diversion. Additionally, MDE was awarded EPA's solid waste infrastructure for recycling grant, and we're currently undertaking statewide analysis on where to best expand on the infrastructure to support reuse and recycling throughout the state, which includes those associated with compost. And then lastly, the Maryland passed legislation in 2023 that requires the state to perform a statewide needs assessment associated to support recommendations for establishing and implementing an extended producer responsibility or EPR program in the state for packaging materials, of which compostables are being evaluated. Maryland has 6 permitted operated compost facilities that accept food scraps. That does not include those that are in development or exempt due to the size of the facility. And currently associated with all 24 of our political jurisdictions, we estimate our municipal solid waste contains about 1.4 million tons of food residuals annually.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. And then Ilana, let's go to you.
Hi, sorry. My name is Ilana Goldstein. I work at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I'm in the Mid-Atlantic office where I focus on the sustainable management of food. And I previously worked at the national level at headquarters. So kind of wearing 2 hats today in terms of what I'm talking about. Just to kind of give an overview of the role that EPA plays in the composting system within EPA's Sustainable Materials Management Program. One of the areas we focus on is the sustainable management of food. It's led by our headquarters office, and we also have 10 regional offices across the country with regional sustainable management of food contacts. Often, I think we get asked what our role is, and EPA plays kind of a unique role in this space, as opposed to some of the other folks in this call who mentioned, regulatory aspects within the sustainable management of food program. It is a voluntary program, and so we don't have regulatory aspects to it. Many of you may be familiar with our wasted food scale, which came out in 2023 and assesses the 11 common pathways for managing wasted food in the US based on their environmental impacts and potential contributions to a circular economy. This replaced the food recovery hierarchy, which was used before, and moved up composting in the scale, which had been below anaerobic digestion previously. I mention this because it gets to one of the areas that we work on, which is tools and resources. But I'm going to go backwards and then go forwards with kind of the overview of, we released in 2024 a national strategy for reducing food loss and waste and recycling organics with the USDA and FDA. It was a joint federal strategy. And in that strategy, we laid out 4 objectives. 2 of them are increasing the recycling rate for all organic waste and supporting policies that incentivize and encourage the prevention of food loss and waste and organics recycling. So how we do all that includes a number of things. Talking about the tools and resources, like what I just described, we provide other tools and resources, such as our excess food opportunities map, updated composting web pages, toolkits for communities on how to roll out a curbside composting or drop-off program. We facilitate peer-to-peer networks such as the EPA Compost Anaerobic Digestion Peer Network, where the audience is specific to state and local governments. We focus on past and future research, and we have developed such reports on chemical contaminants and plastic contamination in compost. We provide funding opportunities. Some of you may be familiar with our recent and upcoming solid waste infrastructure and recycling grant program, the Consumer Recycling Outreach and Education Grant Program, our climate pollution reduction grants, and regional sustainable materials management funding opportunities. And we also have a program that's not within our office, but in another office at EPA, which we work closely with, and they assess and recommend standards and eco labels for use in federal procurement. So in addition to all of these things, we're trying to expand the market for products made from recycled organic waste, enhance support to advance decentralized organics recycling, and build, refine, and share tools and data to aid decision-making about infrastructure investments, policies, and waste management pathway destinations. Just a few of the things that are upcoming that we're working on. We have many efforts underway on composting, including a report that we're going to publish on the benefits of compost use and barriers to compost, benefits and barriers to compost use, providing a synthesis of the latest science related to contamination by plastics and PFAS in organics recycling. And we're creating a tool to calculate the avoided methane emissions from diverting food waste from landfills. And lastly, we're working to expand the recommendations in the food serviceware category for federal procurement. And I will pause there.
That's great. And I put into the chat something that we are going to reference and question too, so you can pull that up yourself, but I'm also going to show us here. And so our question too is, how does your organization's programs or policies align with the wasted food scale? What does your organization believe are the greatest opportunities to manage organic materials and compostables within your jurisdiction? And lastly, what sustainability goals do your programs and or policies work to support? And so before we get started, I just wanted to share the visual of what everybody's going to be talking about. And so, and again, you've got the link in the chat so you can bring that up on your own computer too, but just wanted to share this visual before we go into hearing our responses from our panelists. And so let's hear from Lisa first.
All right. So as just like most municipalities, we've definitely embraced the wasted food scale and are happy to have that as a tool to share. As much as possible, we try to craft all of our waste-related policies and programs around the principles of reduce and reuse rather than dispose, which is very much in alignment with the wasted food scale. We currently have focused our written outreach, such as our newsletters, our social media, et cetera, on individual behavior changes. And we also offer formal classes and programming to educate on preventing food waste and the economic and social benefits of that. And then finally, we strive to encourage backyard composting. So using yard waste on site as mulches or leaving garden bed waste in place to create habitats for pollinators to overwinter. And while we certainly want people to compost through our compost program, we promote these actions as a higher use of that material and a more sustainable option than using the curbside program. So while yard waste is not necessarily food, I do believe this certainly aligns with those principles of leave it unharvested when you can. Regarding opportunities looking forward, we're very excited to be launching this food scrap collection program for multifamily residents. One thing to note about municipal government is that we have an obligation to serve all of our residents. We believe that offering a composting option to our multifamily community will promote further equity through access to organics recycling. We're very hopeful this program helps us not only to recover a significant amount of food waste in time, but also it gives us direct communication with a sector of our population that has not been prioritized in the past. And then on policies, I have two things I wanted to mention. One program goal that I touched on in my first response is our compost give back programs. And I just wanted to expand a little on the why of that. So when it comes, it does come as a big expense to our ratepayers, but our program is prioritizing getting compost back into our valley soils and really putting a lot of the emphasis of our program on soil health. Boise's climate is a high desert, and yet we experience seasonal precipitation events that seem to be increasing in intensity and frequency year over year. So by focusing on increasing the organic material in our soils, we're enabling our soils both to hold on to that water, potentially reducing runoff or flooding during raining times, and reducing the need to irrigate with what precious water we have in our hot and dry summers here. The second policy I wanted to share that's been received really well is a recent change to our zoning code and the associated development requirements. So to further increase compost use and application in our valley, we recently amended our planning and development requirements to include a soil amendment standard. This means that all development or redevelopment requires a specified compost application or an approved compost amended topsoil blend on areas that are turf or landscape. So while this policy was crafted and sold as a water conservation practice, we of course hope that the demand for that material will lead to additional local organics recycling opportunities and improve our local compost markets.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And that's such a great follow on to the session that we did on large scale application and kind of what end markets need in order to take advantage of this incredible resource. Okay, Sarah.
Yes, thank you. Much like Lisa, we are also, our programs and policies are focused on waste reduction first. That's been our strongest messaging. We want folks to use less and generate less waste, and then the waste they do generate, do the most responsible thing with, whether that's recycle or compost, or if it could be donated or shared or repaired. And so in that vein, we did a food waste challenge this past June. We have under contract a nonprofit that works with us to host these challenges. And they had done several challenges in the community around general zero waste, but the food waste challenge had a higher participation rate than any of the others, which we just, I think, underscores the interest that folks have. This challenge gave people information on how to like shop, prepare, consume, and dispose of food. So it was focused on food storage tips and food planning to try and reduce the amount of food waste that is generated. And it was very, very popular. So we're hoping to continue that type of education going forward. Ann Arbor similarly has a pollinator aware yard care program where folks can either delay mowing, plant with native plants, or in the winter also leave the leaves and sort of foster that. And again, that is yard material, but it's to that idea of kind of reducing even what goes to compost, even though we think that is beneficial, just keeping it in places higher up that system. So the other thing we have our A20 climate action plan. We have a goal of carbon neutrality by 2030, and specifically within that plan, strategy 5 is around the way to change the way we use, reuse, and dispose of materials, and it very specifically calls out expanding compost collection for those multifamily and commercial sectors. We have some things that are happening, but it's not a full-scale, robust program, and that is what we are working to develop at this time. So that's probably our greatest opportunity going forward.
That's great. Thank you so much. Jennifer.
All right, let's see how my connection's doing. One thing I'll start with is even upstream to what we've been speaking a lot about is we have a mayor's office of food policy, and they're looking at procurement and what does the city buy when it comes to inputs into our community from a sourcing perspective. And this aligns well with our mayor's commitment to a plant-based diet. So we've been trying to look at reducing our impact on that level as well as sort of upstream, if you will. And I think there's some really great resources in our mayor's office of food policy if folks want to check that out. In addition, as far as the wasted food scale, We have a Donate NYC program that has a specific portal dedicated to food donations. And for many years, we've been working with community-based organizations such as food banks to really optimize reallocation of food within micro communities of the city. And we do that using algorithms and app-based alignment of matching donors to recipients. So that's been something we've had actually got really good data on as well through leveraging technology in that way. Further down the scale, we actually anaerobically digest more food waste than we compost in the city. And we work with our wastewater utility, the Department of Environmental Protection, to do that. We have a co-digestion program and some pre-processing partners that make collected material into a slurry. On the scale, it does note that in those instances, you want to ensure that you're recovering the materials from co-digestion and from wastewater treatment. And before coming to sanitation, I actually worked at that agency and specifically on the biosolids recovery program. So we have done work to advance biosolids beneficial use in New York City. We also have implemented a gas to grid program. So the wastewater facility that is doing the primary co-digestion of food waste in our city also has an RNG system that is set up and is replacing fossil and natural gas with a combination of food waste and human waste derived biogas. And then the other thing I'll mention is the Department of Sanitation, provides residential collection in New York City. Commercial waste is collected by the private Carter system. We are in the process of rolling out a zone system, also maybe known as franchising, where the city will be divided into 20 geographic zones. And there was a competitive procurement for which private companies can service each geographic area. As part of that procurement, it is mandatory for every provider to offer organics collection services to all businesses within that geographic area. It was also mandatory in that procurement that organics collection service be priced cheaper than regular trash service to incentivize diversion of organics from the commercial sector. So we have wrapped up that extremely complicated and detailed process and are beginning implementation of our commercial waste zones in Eastern Queens this year.
Yeah, and there's to have more than a handful of zones is pretty impressive. Just to have like 20 different areas that you're juggling services for the commercial sector. That's amazing. I am going to read out Darla Arian's response and from the Colorado Hazardous Materials and Waste Management Division. And so what she is sharing is the creation of new compost facilities will increase local waste circularity options. Compost is a local and sometimes hyper-local solution for material circularity, and it is most effective when creating soil amendment for local lands from waste generated at the local level. This gives communities greater control over their waste outcomes and connects them to both their waste and their lands. From an EPR perspective, the greatest opportunity to improve the circularity of the U.S. composting system is by having producers of compostable packaging participating in responsible end-of-life management of their products, which ultimately leads to a more sustainable design, more communication with compost facilities, and a higher quality and a more valuable commodity in the end. And so next up, Shannon.
So again, as I said, I sit within the Maryland Department of Environment, and so within the food system, with the food residual diversion law and our regulations, MDE's participation in a statewide food system resiliency council, we try to direct and energize foods that can be edible and servable to people as the state's top priority, right? So when we're looking at how this all relates to the wasted food scale, we definitely are looking at that top end first. And then as we meet with those who fall within the mandate of the food residual diversion law and regulation, we explain the importance of diversion as it relates to that hierarchy established under the wasted food scale And then as that feeds into our overarching climate action plan that Maryland established in 2022. Maryland has about 6.8 million persons, and we are definitely located heavily within that 95 corridor. So similar to the 5 on the East Coast, the 95 corridor is where our population is most dense. It has a lot of opportunity to move those materials for organics recycling. It's advantageous because of the volume, but logistically it's challenging due to that density and the means to transport for utilization in the primary agricultural sectors. The benefits of an environmentally progressive state and the positive cross-coordination with our state and local agencies is that driving opportunity that we have within our state. MDE supports our Department of General Services state green purchasing program. In 2023, legislation was passed that requires state agencies to procure locally generated recycled materials for projects, and that includes soil amendments and mulches. The intention is to expand those markets for those materials, including compost. In addition, within the SWIFR state work plan, Maryland Department of the Environment is looking to optimize food serviceware in our publicly supported programs, such as the corrections, education, and aging, to determine how to best sustain procurement of those materials for diversion and reuse so that we can meet the environmental, labor, and economic goals of our state. So we kind of look at all of those components when we're looking at the procurement side. Again, I work in the Department of the Environment, but I work really closely with our other state agencies associated with procurement.
That's great. And there's so many different program examples that's being shared today. And so what I would love to recommend is any of the programs that you've mentioned, if you have visibility of that online on your organization's website, if you could share that in the chat, that would be fabulous. This is a great resource sharing space. Okay, Alana, if you want to wrap up question 2.
Sure. And I just wanted to say, I know there was a question in the chat about something that I forgot to mention, which was our federal interagency coordination. We work very closely with USDA and FDA, and more recently USAID. So there is a lot that's happening at the federal level between different agencies that may not have been known by some folks at the call, but sort of focusing a little bit more on the second question. So similar to what Shannon said, we prioritize the pathways at the front, at the top of the wasted food scale as the preferred pathways, preventing wasted food, donating and upcycling food. Those offer the most benefits to the environment and to a circular economy. However, we also work on composting, as I said, and wanted to focus on that as that's the question here. So a couple opportunities that we feel are created by improving the circularity of the US composting system. One is reduced landfill methane emissions and GHG emissions overall. We, in order to understand the impact that food waste has on US landfill greenhouse gas emissions, we developed a report recently on called the Quantifying Methane Emissions from Landfill Food Waste report, and we looked at estimated the quantity of methane emissions released into the environment from decaying food waste in municipal solid waste landfills in the US from 1990 to 2020, and found that an estimated 58% of fugitive methane emissions from MSW landfills are from landfill food waste. We also see an opportunity in the increased awareness of the use of compost in non-agricultural sectors. We see an opportunity in looking and viewing food scraps and other organic materials as a resource rather than a waste product. One big area that we see growing is making linkages between climate change mitigation and adaptation, resilience, and local and state plans, and composting and compost use. They, depending on which one we're talking about, can have linkages in both areas. And a big example of that is the EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. Just announced some selected applicants for those grants, and there are a few that are going to be doing some projects in this space. There's also opportunities in the benefits of compost as a soil amendment. Many of you probably know these, but the potential for carbon sequestration, reduced erosion, soil health, increased water retention, and increased soil microbial activity. And then beyond the use in ag and landscaping, compost water retention and filtration properties are very beneficial in stormwater management and green infrastructure. And compost use has also proven benefits for urban soils and in remediation. One other opportunity is partnerships across sectors. I feel like this space has given us pathways to talk to different stakeholders that maybe hadn't been part of that conversation before. So that's another area of opportunity that I wanted to identify.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alana. We're going to move to our third question, which is, what have been some of the greatest challenges your organization has observed or experienced in trying to create or support effective composting systems? So we'll start back up at the top with Lisa.
All right, so I have two challenges that I wanted to mention today. First, I'd say Sarah and Ann Arbor's opportunity is our challenge right now. I think I speak on behalf of many cities in saying that tackling the need to divert commercial organic waste is just a really hard thing for us to do. Most of you know that the variability in organic waste streams across commercial sectors is wide, and it's ever changing, and it's inconsistent seasonally sometimes. Because our customer rates are set and approved annually by a much too complex process and have to be approved by city council, we're unable to offer a flexible individual rate that's appropriate for the volume and the makeup of most commercial organic waste. So it's just a really hard service for government to provide in a fair way. In our community, we responded to this a couple of years ago now by codifying an open market for commercial organics hauling. This means that any company can haul organic waste outside of our otherwise exclusive franchise agreement. We hope this would set the stage for private business to step in and help. Yet 2 years since this change took effect, we have seen no new haulers come into our area. Despite having multiple private yard waste facilities, we're also lacking in processing options for collected commercial organic waste. So I would say a major challenge is just how do we encourage and support these much needed businesses to come start up or move into the Boise market. We are putting a lot of food waste into our local landfill through commercial organics right now. And then second, I know this is a broken record on this series, but it's just the contamination that comes into our facility. As a whole, Boiseans are very environmentally conscious and they care about our ecosystem. And most people do a great job sorting their recycling and organics. But as you've heard from other composters, it just takes one missed bag of kitchen trash accidentally going through the grinder, and we have big problems. We're constantly pushing our facility staff to spend more and more time at the front end, but it's a tough, really nasty job, especially when it's hot and all that soon to be beautiful compost is just buzzing with flies. It costs a lot for us to deal with it. It makes our facility look bad when visitors come or elected officials who should be supporting our program. And worse, that small plastic can end up blowing into nearby farm fields. Our immediate neighbors grow feed crops, and in 2022, they had to dispose of multiple tons of failed alfalfa due to the presence of plastic, which is just unacceptable in the animal feed markets. We solved it by installing $100,000 of fencing, but even that is not foolproof, and that's an unfortunate way to be spending public money. So how do we clean up that inbound material? We can audit carts on the street, we can pull them from offenders, we can issue fines. These things might work, but they're very unpopular and it's expensive to implement. We can do more education, but it's almost impossible to ever reach everyone. And unfortunately, the presence of compostables and the current industry messaging makes our communication and our contamination problems even more confusing to consumers and customers.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, we're going to go to Sarah.
Yep, all that probably. Plus a couple of other things. I mean, commercial is an opportunity for us, but we also recognize that's challenging. We have a commercial franchise for refuse collection, and we do have an option under that for compost if customers are interested. We haven't had a lot of businesses take advantage of that since when our contract started last July 2023. So it's been kind of slow. We're looking at how we can grow that or maybe do a different approach to get more of that material, but that definitely is an area for growth, but also a challenging one for us to address. And the two things I wanted to talk about in terms of challenges for us, probably the biggest one in the past year or so is we've had some changes to what's acceptable in our curbside program in terms of compostable products, and that's made it very challenging to try and educate folks on what can and cannot go in the cart. And that's both businesses that maybe want to purchase compostable products. They want their customer to be able to compost it, as well as our residents. It's just, it's a hard thing to simplify, and we've tried to make it simple, but that's been a big hurdle for us, I would say. And then the other thing that we've tried to figure out is how do we measure a successful program? For years in solid waste industry, tons diverted was the major metric for all things. That was great success. But as I mentioned before, we're trying to encourage folks to reduce waste such that it's never generated, and or perhaps for some of their yard material, keep it at home and not put it at the curb for us to collect. And so that growth in tons composted may not be there in the way that it has historically. So we're trying to figure out how we can tell that message that we still, have a successful program, and that our residents are managing their material in an even more responsible way, even though that might be more difficult to quantify. So I would say those are two of our bigger things. We also do struggle with contamination. We've done some audits of our material over the past year, and it's been interesting to see what's there, where the issues lie. It's not always the things that we think are the biggest offenders, so that does help with our education messaging. But I would say what happens often is it does end up, we just get trash in the cart that's not supposed to be there at all. So it's, even though we hear a lot about the confusion about what is and is not compostable, where our issue lies is actually just folks not using the cart appropriately.
Thank you, Sarah. Jennifer, we're going to go to you.
Yeah, I think one of our largest challenges has been the ups and downs of the program over time. We've been doing some version of organics diversion composting for a decade in New York City. It's covered different areas, different community districts, different times of year. So we're hoping with our citywide program in October, we're finally through the ups and downs and have a consistent, highly accessible version for everyone. It's also interesting because our neighborhoods are very different across the city. Staten Island, for example, is in some points almost suburban, yet we have the same sort of infrastructure, education, and overall management system as we do in the high-rise, extremely dense areas of Manhattan. So how do we work through those differences in scale and service under one organization has been one of our other challenges. Finally, I definitely think that contamination is something that we all struggle with. I don't have much to add there. I think maybe in question 4, I'll talk more about it. But I will note that when we look at capacity development, and what I mean by that is like the end capacity development, aside from the infrastructure that New York City has invested in, most of the private investment in organics processing infrastructure in this region that has proven to sort of exist through time is not compost infrastructure. It's generally anaerobic digestion infrastructure. And I think some of that has to do with incentives on like biogas that I mentioned before that make those projects more attractive to private investment, something that the compost industry maybe doesn't have access to in current incentive markets. But nonetheless, I think in the absence of a municipality investing their own capital in the development of compost infrastructure, I'm not seeing much of that, at least for food scraps, showing up in the private sector, whereas we get many inquiries about the development of anaerobic digestion infrastructure. So in the context of this, I thought that would be a challenge worth putting on the table. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go over to our by proxy response from Darla. So Darla says, cost and siting are typically the biggest issues with creating compost operations in Colorado. The cost to start up, permit, and operate a compost facility can be challenging when contrasted with low disposal costs of waste in traditional landfills. CDPHE recently revised the solid waste regulations governing compost in order to help alleviate the permitting burden for certain facilities, but challenges remain. The marketing of finished compost as a valuable soil amendment has also been a challenge, and focusing on creating and growing new markets will be critical to the success of compost systems in the state. Without consistent design guidelines and requirements, there are a lot of products on the market that compost facilities do not want to see at their facilities because they contaminate the material and cost more money to manage. A second challenge is around the collection of compostables. Space constraints, odor management, source contamination, and costs are challenges we hear about. And then we will move down to Shannon.
I think I can, reaffirm everything that the previous speakers shared, including Darla. I think a lot of these challenges come down to, the cost and also the education, right? So what we're perceiving here is a lot of lack of education, and then those perceived roadblocks associated with permitting of those materials. Maryland has established a general permit for composting operations to expedite on the approval process at the state level for both land and water permits. But the agricultural community who has the greatest benefit of utilization of this output may have established procurement programs associated with other permits to meet their nutrient management plans. And meeting all the buyers and sellers of these materials is a real hurdle that the state we are currently working on to address and to figure out how to best synergize those efforts. We have some other challenges with the collection of materials, such as smaller size composters in our state do not have the ability or the capacity to receive large quantities of contaminated materials in their collection. And then they set those boundaries when they set up their contracts. Then there's a lot of greenwashing associated with terms like biodegradable and compostable. And that has inserted a really big kink in our system where confusion to the general public starts, really it dominates, from our rote memory and our core memory. So it's really creating a lot of chaos on that end collection side, where the larger composters have, who dominate our system, have the ability to accept greater quantities of contamination as a whole, right? Because they're receiving more materials, due to their ability to separate that from mechanical advantage. And then there's that real big gap in our system within the state for the small and extra large, right? Like there's no medium pieces to this in our state. So that's kind of one of our bigger challenges is kind of where's the meat in the middle. And similarly, within New York City, the development of anaerobic digestion is a lot of where our inquiries are being, handled from across the state right now. We do have some compost coming. We've approved some permits conditionally within the state as well. But again, there's a lot more inquiries coming through on anaerobic digestion than there are on composting facilities.
Thank you, Shannon. And Alana, go to you.
Sure. Somehow, some of the greatest challenges we've observed in creating and supporting effective composting systems are lack of composting infrastructure capacity and lack of access. So even when there's sufficient infrastructure capacity in a region, it might not be accessible to all. For example, access for multifamily households is a challenge for many jurisdictions who only generally can service single family households. Also, access in rural areas is another challenge we see. 2, national data on existing composting infrastructure is not consistent. We get asked a lot of questions about maps, and I know there's several out there and something we know we need to work on with our partners. Additionally, many jurisdictions only have composting facilities that accept yard and tree trimmings and not food scraps. So that's more to the access, but also to the capacity. Dedicated long-term funding is needed to support food scraps collection programs and/or infrastructure. We see that some jurisdictions find funding for pilot programs through grants and other sources of of assistance, but after that pilot is over, they struggle to find a dedicated source of funding to continue their programs. EPA does have several new funding opportunities I mentioned before. Include the Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling Grant Program and the Consumer Recycling Education and Outreach Grant Program. In round one, which was in fiscal year 2023, we found that there was much more demand for funding than we were able to award. We are going to be rolling out a round two for both of these grant programs, by the way, this fall. Some other things we notice, behavior change, getting people to value food scraps as a resource and not as a waste product that you just put down the drain or throw away in the trash. Also for the consumer, although we measure tonnage, the consumer doesn't equate that tonnage measurement with the amount or the scraps that they're diverting. There's confusion for consumers in labeling of products, as was mentioned previously. Also, I would say with pre-processing technologies that are coming out and claiming to produce compost when it's not compost. Permitting and siting of composting facilities is a challenge. NIMBYism is a huge challenge. Municipalities that may face administrative barriers in applying for and managing large grants in the composting space. Three more, finding the right size and solution to fit a given community, sharing best practices, and contamination.
That's great. We are going to share our next question, which is, what should other stakeholders in the supply chain and solid waste management system take into consideration when problem solving about some of the things that you've brought up today? What do you think would be the most helpful? And so we're going to start with Lisa.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to talk a little bit on kind of the scale of packaging and the availability to consumers of a lot of these products. I think many municipal programs go back and forth on the should we accept compostables in our programs. We are thinking about it all the time. But harsh reality is that compostable products really complicate the curbside programs in particular. Just because of the nature of curbside collection, we will literally never be free of having trash coming in along with our inbound materials. We know this from recycling, from years of data. It will just never happen. So in a perfect world, all disposable serveware intended to touch food in any capacity would be compostable. But until that's the case, we will still be dealing with plastic serveware, wax line plates, non-compostable look-alike packaging, all of those things. And the people working at the compost facility at the speed they have to work just cannot tell the difference between these products. Residents trying to do the right thing by buying compostable products, and often the grocery stores selling them don't seem to understand the logistics of a compost facility. So despite the non-acceptance of these items in local programs, every grocery store near me at least has an entire section of compostable disposables in household available packaging. Complete with in-store marketing that encourages consumers to be more environmentally friendly by purchasing them. But ultimately, they cost the consumer more. The package labeling is contradictory to our program regulations and rules. And when well-meaning consumers buy them, they ultimately do nothing but cost our city facility time and money to find them and dig them out and put them into the trash. We are the frontline educators for many of these issues. We have access to more people than many marketing campaigns. And that inconsistent messaging coming from other sources really depletes the public trust in the information that we as the city are sharing. So all that said, I truly do believe in the ability of compostable packaging and serveware solutions in tackling food waste diversion from our landfills, particularly in those cafeteria and event and commercial settings. But how do we marry that need to scale these solutions with protecting the many very successful curbside programs across this country that account for millions of recycled organics? And I don't have the answer, but that was just the issue I wanted to bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing those. Shifting over to Sarah.
Yes, so very similarly, I wanted to talk about two things for like sort of everyone in the group is the education, and then also kind of the speed and ability of government to update things. As I mentioned, we recently had some changes to what was accepted in our program, and that takes a very long time for us to prepare to change over any educational materials we have, and then also to get that information to our residents. And because we're consistently educating, they may have an outdated resource that says something different, and then that causes confusion as well. So it's not quick and easy to make changes to what goes into a program and what to look for. And so building on that, similarly to what Lisa said, when it's not easy and quick for my resident, who's also a consumer, to know if something that they're purchasing or using can go in their compost cart, that leads to frustration on their part, contamination in our program, challenges to us on the education. So it's just understanding that, deciding what to do with the cup that they're holding when they're done drinking their beverage, for example. The amount of time that someone is giving to that decision is extremely limited. So it needs to be like as simple as possible for them to know if that could go in their compost cart, for example, or not. And that's just, we get questions all the time, and we do our best to answer them. And our community is extremely passionate about the environment. They're extremely dedicated to responsible waste management. They've been doing these programs for years. They're willing to get into the details, and sometimes they want to have that really nuanced conversation, but that doesn't make for great broad scale education. You need that messaging to be able to be simple and easy to digest. So that's kind of what I would like to share with the group.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sarah. All right, Jennifer.
Yeah, I really actually agree with what Sarah just said. And I think it reflects a lot, particularly on a city the size of New York. When we had our voluntary programs where we required people to sign up for service, our enrollment rate was relatively low, which was disappointing to us, but it also made us realize that folks aren't going to take the extra effort. So now we've gone into a space where not only will the program be available citywide in October, it's mandatory. It was passed by the city council that it's mandatory for folks to participate. We'll see how that goes, but I think there's going to be a large difference between what participation looks like from the ones who voluntarily did to those who are now being required to. If anything, I think we will have an additional uptake, perhaps uptick in contamination. So my approach and my evolution as a practitioner has been to not let perfect be the enemy of the good. I think that we are expecting double-digit contamination rates. We are leaning on pre-processing equipment, and we are still diverting significant organics from the landfill. And that's what a major urban program looks like. Unfortunately, because of what we've heard, compostables are in that extraction piece. It's just the way facilities are designed right now. I think from the last conversation on this, I took away maybe a personal desire to lean into things that work for people and design them in a way that works for us too. And a really strong example I would have of that is the plastic bag. If we can find a plastic bag that can get out there and just be a vessel for transporting organics, that would be a winner. We break them open and try to scream them out the best we can here in our program. But the reality is that almost our entire solid waste system is built around bagging material in New York City. So I think that we should lean into that as much as we can. And the last thing I'd say is finding wins that maybe go across the stakeholder supply chain, as you mentioned. If there's something that we all sort of agree is working, let's celebrate that, and let's explain how it's working for all of us along that supply chain, because that might help us find other similar wins. So
That's great. And remind me, does New York City in your program accept compostables, or is it simply food scraps and other organic materials?
we do, but we can't speak to their actual recovery rate due to a lot of them, depending on what they are, getting screened out. And again, the inability to distinguish between, say, a compostable plastic, say, utensil and one that is not.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I am going to read out Darla's response. So the success of a compost facility relies on a number of factors that all need to be taken into consideration prior to beginning operations. Where will the facility be located? Are the neighbors a concern? Do the transportation corridors make sense for both the feedstocks that will be accepted as well as the end markets that the finished materials will be sold into? What kind of permits are required? Is there local government support? What will the local land use requirements be? What feedstocks will be accepted? Is contamination an issue? What kind of equipment is needed to process those feedstocks effectively and make a clean and valuable finished product? What kind of product will be created and what are the best uses? Is there already demand, or will the market have to be developed? This year, we've developed a toolkit that we hope helps with the development of new facilities and all of the considerations that need to be weighed before undertaking any organic waste diversion projects. We hope that by understanding the potential hurdles ahead of time, some of these challenges won't seem so big when they arise. And so it sounds like a very powerful go, no go checklist and process that they will be entering into. And so, and it's been interesting listening for kind of a continuation of the conversation around infrastructure. And I know in some places there's required permits for land, water. We've heard in other areas that it's an air permit as well. And so lots of different things to take into consideration just to make these facilities a reality. Okay, so shifting over to Shannon.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with a lot of what Darla said on the state side, right? So we have a lot of consideration associated with infrastructure, but it's also that local buy-in, and not just on the siting and the zoning approval process, but those logistics, those downstream markets, again, what Darla had shared. Who are the contributors to that overall system, and then what education has been provided at and what rate, right? So the same thing as what the previous cities had, provided. What is that education? And who's ultimately responsible for those diversion pieces? When we think about municipal solid waste, if I didn't myself live and breathe in this space, how could I possibly know anything outside of my rote core understanding of what recycling is? And so to establish broad and really realistic education for the individual consumer, who is the one that plays such an integral and vital part of the system itself. So a lot of that should be considered when we're establishing, product development, and also, the collection aspects as well. And that can kind of really play a big part in our education system, since that's the foundation for those rote and those core memories as to what is this and how do I handle it? Are you still thinking about information that you received? I can definitely date myself, but I definitely remember, the different ways in which I was as a child collecting materials and separating them. And then how does that parlay into rural and urban environments?
That's great. Thank you. Okay, and Alana.
Sure. So for us, or actually I should say for for question number 4 about what should other stakeholders in the supply chain take into consideration? In terms of what would be the most helpful, we need to think about which stakeholders are missing our problem solving conversations around these issues, and ensure that all perspectives are being shared. And think about, are we preaching to the choir? Are we working in a silo? In our own silos, we should think about how existing systems can work together better with policy and regulations, and think about how we can expand compost use markets so that that can drive the demand for producing the compost. Because there's no one size fits all in composting, we see and we need that network of backyard community and industrial. And I would say, echoing what others have said, I think sharing lessons learned is very valuable. So I wanted to point out that on our website I'll put this in the chat. hold on one second. We've compiled, and we're going to continue to add in the near future a bunch of resources that have been put together by partners on everything from how to incorporate food waste into municipal action plans, model policies for compost procurement, toolkits and template legislation for how to enact organic spend in your community, model compost rules. So there's a lot out there in terms of work that's already been done to help share lessons learned. And EPA has 2 peer networks that we use, like I said, for state and local governments to also share these example programs. So that's one of the ways that we're seeing that come into play and have positive results. But obviously there's a lot more room for opportunity there.
Oh, that's great. And one of the things that we always hold is a space to kind of follow on to some of the things that we've heard the panelists share. And so we have kind of a bonus question that we want to ask, just kind of focused on lessons learned, just because each of you have had so much experience with programs and policies that have been implemented from your organization's perspective. And so want to share kind of that question, as well as giving you an opportunity as we close to share anything that you were hoping to share that we haven't asked about. And so, so going first to Lisa.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the biggest lessons learned or unexpected outcomes is just how much people connect with the circularity of organics recycling, and being able to put compost back into people's houses and their homes and have them touch it and feel it and see what's in it. The buy-in from that is incredible. And I think it just creates so much opportunity. People care more about their organics recycling than any other program. It's consistently positive. It's easy for us to talk about. It's just a win, despite the challenges and the road ahead. But yeah, I really do think our biggest lesson was just getting that compost back to people and talking about soil health, talking about where it's going, instead of focusing so much on our diversion numbers. And these things has been a real benefit to our program and our community.
Well, that's great. Sarah.
Yes, so I mentioned in my introductory, earlier question about our food waste challenge and just how many folks were interested in that over some of our other zero waste challenges. And so I think that echoes what Lisa was just saying, in that this is something people really connect with. And I think there's maybe an ingrained, like, people do not like to see food go to waste. So it's something that they're tied into, and being able to compost it instead of landfill it, the things that are inevitably waste from food prep and cooking and things, I think really is something that folks want to be able to do. I think something I wanted to mention that I did not earlier was around the confusion for single-use disposables, whether they're compostable or recyclable. We are also looking at where we can go with reusables. I think moving to cups and containers that are returnable. We have a pilot program here for that, where we have a handful of restaurants participating, and we're looking to see how that can be grown as well, would also help with that confusion. Something that's more durable. One would hope, people then recognize that that doesn't go in any of the carts, and then that will help cut down on some of that contamination, where you're holding something that's a single-use disposable and trying to figure out if that particular item can go in the recycling, or if it can go in the composting, or if it can go in neither.
That's great. Thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah. I guess convenience is king. That's a lesson learned. People love convenience, love Amazon. Wonder if there's a role for Amazon in this somewhere. But certainly life in the speed of life in New York City, that is the way we go around here. The other thing I would like to say that I hadn't touched on is we have a smart bin program. It's an app unlocked, unmanned drop-off site. We have them strategically placed around the city. We co-collect them on the route trucks that collect our school organics, and they're really popular. That's what I use. And in some cases where we've struggled with multifamily building participation, they seem to be a really good option. So check out the smart bin concept if it's unfamiliar to you.
That's great. And again, if that's something that is you could share in the chat, that would be a great resource. Shannon, how about for you?
Yeah, so I guess I want to share the lessons learned associated with our state's food residual diversion law. You know, it really is focused on the larger food, the wasted food generators. And what we've come to realize is that there's a lot of confusion as to do they or don't they based on the law, right? Because our law has kind of a flow chart, for lack of better terms, of if this, then maybe, and then yes, you must. And I'd say that if I was looking to work on policy development associated with that in other states, to really consider having more like firmer boundaries associated with it, simply because that reduces the confusion. Now, the intention behind ours is also to drive more infrastructure, right? So I don't want to remove that piece of it because we do need the infrastructure for the diversion. And I just wanted to provide that both end of the law associated with that, and then any future policies. Likewise, you know, I'm a state agent, and our political jurisdictions are responsible for all of their materials that they generate. And with each of them having their own progressive and choice management associated with their solid waste, and also source reduction activities, that can cause a lot of confusion to the individual resident. And then lastly, because we have such a blended population along the 95 corridor that falls into other states and other jurisdictions, there's a lot of, again, confusion on that. So if you live in one state that has a ban, you work in another that doesn't, how does that interlay and into to weave into that? And so our biggest hurdle in all of this is the education and the outreach to explain the whys of why we're doing what we're doing to meet our climate action goals, and how this is a controllable aspect associated with that has the benefit to, of course, feed people, and that is our greatest, you know, progress within the state.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Alana, we're going to finish with you.
I would echo what Shannon said about increasing awareness and education. I feel like that is probably one of the biggest lessons that we've learned. We have a Food to Good to Waste peer network where a lot of researchers share studies that are done with households on what's going on at the household level. What are they understanding or not understanding? What are their views on not just composting, but also reducing the amount of food that they're wasting in the first place? So I think the lessons learned from that research is invaluable for all of us in this space. We want to compost the stuff that's inedible or spoiled. We don't want to compost that what's edible and can and should be fed higher up the wasted food scale to those who are in need. So that's one thing. Two, I feel like through the federal grants that are out, not just EPA's, but also USDA has a bunch of composting and food waste reduction cooperative agreements. We are learning from those about different programs and what their experiences have been so that we can share it with others. Specifically, what went well and what didn't go well. What can you learn from this program? What can you adapt and implement in another town or another jurisdiction? And something else that I think comes up a lot is starting at the school level, teaching kids, making sure that this gets taught to them at an early level so that they can bring this home and implement it at home and teach their parents. It's very hard, as a lot of us know, to change behavior, especially looking at adults, what we're taught, what we're ingrained. I go to many friends' homes where they have a compost bin for their food scraps, but they're still putting the food scraps down the drain, even though the compost bin is right there, just a couple feet away from them. So I think training and educating and just sharing all this in the schools, whether it's with prevention, whether it's with composting, whether it's even looking at the circular economy in terms of all these materials, specifically seeing food as a resource is really key.
No, that's great. Well, I wanted to just thank everybody for the questions and comments that you put into the chat. What we do for each of these sessions is we gather those questions and we share them with the panelists and put together a Q&A document that then we share in our public Google folder, along with the highlights from each of these sessions. And so we want to give the panelists a chance to be able to respond to the degree of thoroughness of the question that is asked. So just again, thank you for asking your questions, and those we will be sharing back out in the public folder in about a week. We have one final discovery workshop in our series. From those of you who've been following with us along from the beginning, we started in the piles and we moved backwards through the system all the way to policy. And so we're going to be finishing with policy. The session, we changed the time of it to align with what would work for a live stream at the BPI Summit. And also, so some of the participants at the summit could participate as panelists. So, so the time is a little bit different. We're starting a little bit later. Again, everything will be recorded and available in our public library for our YouTube channel. All of this incredible discovery conversations is leading up to a 3-day intensive strategic planning event next month. And so if you're interested in participating, let us know. We've put a couple of different things into the chat. Also, this space, this conversational space is open. And so if you know of others who would like to come to the final panel, share that link with them where they can RSVP, and we'll make sure to add them to that calendar invite. Just sitting with so much appreciation for the expertise that was brought here today, and all the great questions that were asked and the dialogue that's taking place. And also just appreciate all of you that are either here for the first time in today's session or have been following along from the beginning. This is an ecosystem. A whole system strategic planning is organized around the concept that you pull on any one part of the system and it impacts everything else. And so borrowing from John Muir a little bit there, but just wanted to share such a big appreciation for all of you. And this session will be posted to our YouTube channel later today. These are publicly available. Feel free to share the links to the channel or to individual sessions. And we have heard from many people that they've been using these as resources for education across different stakeholder groups. So this is meant to be an open resource. This is meant to be supporting a conversation about the realities, the opportunities, and the challenges that are being faced by different stakeholders in the system. So again, a deep appreciation for you in the audience and for all of our panelists. And thank you so much. Ariel, anything you would add?
Nope, you got it all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you back on the 12th. Thank you so much.